Welcome to the TTT News Special. I'm DK Rosta. We are basking in the glow of the August 1 Emancipation Day observance, and we're joined by the pointer and the dreamer of the Bois Academy of Trinidad and Tobago, Jamie Philbert and Rondel Benjamin, respectively. We say greetings and welcome. Thank you for making the time, and I want to get into factors about emancipation. First off, though, the psychology of emancipation. And I think, Jamie, we'll start with you, please. Is emancipation something given to you? Is emancipation something that you take? Is it something you realize? Is it something that you live?
I think that it's something that we're born into. Yeah, when I came out of my mommy, I was emancipated. So it's not something I'm looking for someone to give to me in a particular sort of way because of what the journey across the waters did to us and colonization inflicted upon us in a particular sort of way. Some of us believe that the date that we're giving for emancipation was the moment that we were actually liberated. But I have a belief that liberation lies inside of you, and liberation and emancipation aren't necessarily synonymous. So that's my take. I will let the dreamer handle it from there.
And I'll ask the dreamer to weigh in while also asking about some factors that we should be thinking about or considering when we say the word emancipation.
Well, we're gonna start it with an old bongo laugh way that I learned from my teachers in Moruga, right? We going home to Africa tonight. Somebody ballin'. We going home to Africa tonight. Zimbabwe crying. So for me, the idea of liberation and reconnecting with our diasporic home is what people call emancipation. Us recognizing and articulating that the disruption and the negative experience never dampened, controlled, limited, or took away our access. Yeah, that's what we're recognizing. We're recognizing that those who celebrated emancipation were actually celebrating Kambule Kalinda, Kambula. You know, one of the ways that we learned from some Zulu elders who we worked with was that it means to be kissed by fire. You know, and you think of this procession of people with fire, burning away, singeing away, clearing away, stealing away. So yeah, Jamie and I were having a conversation about it. And a piece she wrote tremendously shifted my ability to see that what I've been experiencing in Kalinda for the last decade is really just this pedagogy of liberation, this somatic discourse that constantly is filling space with light and energy and love. And so some people call that emancipation, remembering that August 1st was a seminal moment that took 200 to 300 years to achieve, that our people were at war to be able to be themselves for 200 to 300 years, depending on your arrival dates. And so, yeah, that's where we are. We now have achieved the dream of our ancestors. My question is, what are we doing with it?
And that reminds me of Earl Lovelace asking the question, what will we do with what we have done? And that makes me continue along questions. And the way you just said, kissed by fire, you spoke about that method of purification, cut and clear if you want. Can language be emancipatory?
I think that language can be a form of emancipation. It is a form of liberation, but it's also combat, right? Language exposes things and it also imposes things upon you in a particular sort of way. So the exposure of us has been in some ways an imposition, right? So there's a conflict that happens inside of language. Language allows for us to be the creators or to be assimilated by it in a particular sort of way. So we can totally find freedom inside language, but we have to learn that we have the ability to create our own language. A word that I came up with in my writing this week is human manuscripts, right? So we are these living texts, we are these living libraries and documents. So us creating these words and putting them inside, and we do it all the time. We do it with our bodies, we do it with our face, right? There's a part of us that does not have to speak, and that is the most powerful part of our languages, not using actual words. So yes, it's freedom.
And
yes, our movement is that.
And one of the reasons that I ask is because, as opposed to saying, okay, well, there's a managing director or there's a creative director, the Bois Academy of Trinidad and Tobago has a pointer and a dreamer. Take me through the process of that, thanks. Help me understand a little bit.
I feel like I'm gonna let Benji answer that, because that was definitely his dreaming and his visioning on how it is that we should set this up. We definitely move from a place of not going into Western constructs. So the titles that we've given ourselves, the naming ceremonies that we put inside of these roles is bigger than that Western construct, that thing that where people say that we have to be inside of, the way that you should run an organization or a business, and trying to come closer to some of the rituals that we may have forgotten or left behind. So I'll let Benji answer how that came about, the pointer and the dreamer.
What we recognized very early in the research is that calinda is an extension of Bakongo cosmology, the science of living, the art of life, ancient, deep wisdom, the kind of wisdom that formed Kemetic thought, formed Western African thought, that runs all the way from Cameroon to South Africa. It's a tremendous philosophical expression, but because it's African, it's not articulated that way. It's defined as a spiritual belief, right? And they had a process called Mbongi, the house without doors. And in this house without doors, there was a democratic, proto-democratic, the pattern for democracy of this council of elders and advisors and people who are initiated to lead the village, the community, the nation forward. And we recognize that Kalinda and the Kalinda secret societies, if you read Gordon Rollet, and you'll recognize that these societies existed all the way here, this from Louisiana to Brazil. That same distance from Cameroon to South Africa, all throughout the New World. And this philosophical construct is embedded in all our spaces. When you look at Wine Our Astonishment and you look at any spiritual Baptist tradition, the person who guides one on their mourning, the mourning ground, is a pointer, not a leader. They point you back home. They point you on your travel, but they let you do the work, right? They are spirit guides. They are those who retrieve souls, all right? Our leadership needs to be soul and spiritual based. I remember Pearl Springer saying something that was super powerful. The Haitian Revolution worked not because of the tactics or politics, but because of its inception in African spiritual thought, tradition, and art, right? Bois for anybody who likes to research. And then in that, and understanding that the pointer points the way to liminality, then I asked, who's traveling in the liminal? Who's going forward to get the visions and bring it back for the pointer to construct it into a vehicle to move our people forward? And none of this was my thought. This is all Jamie, myself, our community, the ancestral, the initiated, the non-initiated. And if every family in Trinidad have a matriarch, a granny, who's the pointer. And there's different people in the family who at different times dream the family forward. So yeah, we just following our ancestral pattern because we retained more than anybody thinks. And we remembered not to forget, while allowing ourselves to innovate, to adjust, and to be able to conquer this new world we found ourselves in. And so we the conquer, those who did not forget, those who were never broken, are in this space with messages for everyone else. And I hope that this conversation and many conversations in many yards, Moko Jumbi Yard, Pan Yard, all these old places, Orisha Yard, spiritual, that we go back into these spaces that remembered not to forget, and bring forth these psychotechnologies and philosophies and re-inject them into space. Because remember, when we did it the last time with the West Indies team, we created the world beaters. So it's all over the place if you know how to look.
And I feel like you're looking at my notes, talking about looking how to look, because when we come back from this break, I want to ask both of you about the liminality of Kalinda as a recipe for emancipation. We dive into that when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with Jamie Philbert, the pointer, and Rondel Benjamin, the dreamer of the Bois Academy of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the question, liminality of calinda as a recipe for emancipation. Who jump in the ring with that one?
Wanga ye, wanga oh, today's the day. Wanga ye, wanga oh, who got ready to play? What we're talking about is Wanga. Wanga is the science of expression of internal force. Wanga is power. Wanga is strength. Wanga is not black magic. Wanga is the technology that allows liminal access, the ability to enter trance, to travel, to integrate. Other people let's call it flow. Other people let's call it transcendental meditation. We in the Caribbean have found ways to access our best internal self through music, through dance, through ritual. And so this access to liminality, this ability to find oneself, even in the center of confusion and destruction and disruption, is critical to us as a people finding our way forward. And so that's what we have to do. We have to look into our technologies and our sacred knowledges and our rituals and our folk forms and recognize that they are as good as any sports psychology, any performance enhancing thought, any fancy heuristics for speed of decision making. We have to see that calinda is tactical thought, that the calinda practitioners in Moruga like Barra and Stokely and Tony and all them are as good as Sun Tzu in breaking down situations of conflict and finding patterns of success. And so inside of this technology that lies at the root of much of our cultural expression, be it what we now think is Panman thing or fancy sailor thing or the expression of bambula or all these other forms, right? We then see that these calinda societies acted as universities of the body and mind, and that they created spaces where we could access the world.
And I remember in an earlier conversation you were talking about the possibilities of being able to access that state in a manner similar to the All Blacks doing the haka and literally channeling themselves, preparing themselves for the task at hand. But another conversation that you all held earlier, and why I asked the question partially, is that I remember, Jamie, you saying that the Bois man or the Bois woman moves forward but faces whatever is oncoming at an angle. So like if I was a seamstress or a tailor, I would have talked about you're looking at it on the bias. And that helps to deal with things in a particular way. You want to expound on that a little bit for me, please?
I want to expound on that, but I also want to speak to this thing of liminality and understanding that liminality starts within your body, right? We have our limbic system, which is already a space of liminality. Being a woman, we are liminal space. We are the Kalunga line. We are that things that brings the Bois man and the Bois woman and the Bois people into space. So the exacting of that liminality of Kalinda begins with the Bois woman, right? And that's an understanding, right? And that connection between what Kalinda essentially breaks down to mean. One of the meanings of it is the man and the woman going. The Ka speaks to the woman, the Li speaks to man, and this is coming from Congo, Bakongo language, Kikongo, and other different forms that I've pulled up inside of research. The going is Yenda or Yenda or Lenda. And inside of that off-centeredness, that you spoke to, it's literally, I can see everything straight, or my peripheral will allow me to see certain things. But if I lean, I can now see around myself. If I turn my head, I can see back. I can see the entire space. When we play in calinda, when we dance in calinda, when the drummer is drumming in calinda, when the chanteur chants the lavwe in calinda, it's never centered. It's always this thing that allows for layers upon layers upon layers to be exacted. And essentially that is the definition of who we are, right, as Caribbean people. That is who we are as diaspora people. We are not one-dimensional, we are multi-dimensional. So the off-centeredness allows for us to be balanced inside of that multi-dimensionality.
All right, and I want to get some more history from you, and I'll literally ask you, please, Rondel, in terms of some of the history of emancipation that can have been, and I see you using plenty quotation marks, that may have been reframed in the telling. What are some of those things we need to be a little more aware about?
So one of the first places in the diaspora to recognize August 1st and emancipation as critical was Trinidad and Tobago. We have to recognize that the Cambole procession was practiced to articulate this understanding of new liberation. The Cambole procession is the equivalent to stick bands or calinda bands marching through the streets with fire, right? If you then see that at dawn we are marching with fire, what do we call that now?
Juve.
Juve. So we start to recognize that this Cambole procession is a series of interconnected rituals, rituals of remembrance of nations, rituals of strength. The rituals had kings and queens and warriors and nurses, and these bands were called convois or la coupes. And when the colonials saw the power that the African people were gathering, they decided to ban it from August 1st to take away its significance, and they shifted it to Christmas. When they realized it was building too much power, they put it to Carnival Monday and Tuesday. And the calinda processions then became what we now call Carnival. So many of the things we ascribe to Carnival are really born of these rituals of remembrance in emancipation. But what is emancipation? You telling me my people who come on that boat were enslaved? No. They were always free. They were in bondage. They were bondsmen. But in every way and at every moment through the bondage, they always seeked liberation. And they seeked it fervently for hundreds of years faithfully. So when we look at emancipation, it's not August 1st. It's not a day where the English decided it's okay now, little black people, you can now not be slaves anymore. That's not the narrative. The narrative isn't that we now dress in African garb and we recognize ourselves as African and ignore the effort and work of our ancestors in the diaspora who drove liberation, not only for us, but our liberation trickled into the liberation of the rest of the world, right? These are the things we don't understand, that we here, because we are the unbroken of Haiti, we are the generation where the Haitians, pre-Haitian Revolution, who had money, came to Trinidad to avoid the revolution. And so we are the direct descendants of this power, this strength, this majesty.
And with that, we stick a pin and we leave those words of power, just kind of letting them kusumwe as we think about them. So we want to thank you very much, Jamie. We want to thank you very much, Rondel Benjamin and Jamie Philbert, of the Bois Academy of Trinidad and Tobago. And on behalf of the entire news team, we want to thank you for tuning into the TTT News Special. Have a good one.